spaceflight, the very foundation of life in the 30th century. Today, the technology that enables humanity to cross the immense distances between worlds is mature, familiar, even commonplace. But how did humanity come to possess the tools and ships that took us from technological infants imprisoned on our single ancestral world of Earth to an interstellar empire spanning 37 star systems, in which almost anyone can, if they so choose, hurl themselves across the void of space to far-flung stars and planets? In this vid series, we'll explore the enormous challenges, technological accomplishments, and incredible stories of the people who carried humanity on our epic millennium-long journey into the heavens. I am Professor Maximillion Striker, and this is the history of spaceflight. Ever since our distant ancestors' evolving minds first began to awaken to the mysteries of the cosmos over 100,000 years ago, humanity has looked to the stars above and wondered, how might they go there? Yet, for the vast majority of that immense span of time, wonder is all they could do. Through the long ages of hunting and gathering across the boundless plains of ancient Earth's great central southern continent, and on through the rise of civilizations and the founding and breaking of untold nations, the turmoil and tragedy of wars innumerable, humanity has ever sought to know more, to understand more, and to go where they had never gone before. But it was not until the dawn of the age of industrialization, 1,000 years ago, that humanity would begin to contemplate actually taking the first great leap on the journey into the heavens. The hard climb out of Earth's gravity well, for so long the very definition of the impossible, would slowly begin to yield to human invention. Born in the fires of a century of war, weapons built to destroy nations would, ultimately, provide the foundations of the technology that would carry us on our first tentative steps towards the stars. The 20th century CE, a time when the nation-states and petty empires of old Earth were nearing their zenith. Conflict raged across the globe as humanity put their ever-growing scientific and technological might into great power competition that supercharged progress, even as it savaged the singular world upon which humanity depended. As the century reached its halfway point, the global conflict that raged throughout the age twisted and changed once again. Overt military action abated as the greatest powers of the time, separated by oceans both literal and ideological, sought to gain a technological upper hand. Ancient fossilized carbon laid down in Earth's primordial past now powered land and even primitive aerial vehicles, which shrank the world and brought the dangers of war ever closer to home. As direct confrontation became ever more dangerous, the great minds of the age were put to work building ever longer ranged weapons with which to threaten the enemy. As is so often the case in history, it was through this pursuit of ever more destructive weapons that humanity would push back the bounds of the possible. One man in particular, born in the Soviet Empire that occupied, at the time, the east of Earth's Eurasian continent, would prove pivotal to not only the development of such weapons, but also to their transformation from weapons of war into vehicles of exploration. Sergey Pavlovich Korolev, born in 1906 in the Central European country of Ukraine, then a part of the Greater Soviet Empire. As a boy, Korolev had a deep fascination for the emerging technology of aviation. He would go on to study aeronautical engineering and would become a skilled engineer and a gifted manager. Later employed in the Soviet Experimental Aircraft Design Bureau, where he worked on and even personally test flew aircraft to the altitude limits of the day. Perhaps during such a flight, at the limit of what his primitive aircraft could attain, Korolev may have looked up through the tenuous wisps of atmosphere that separated him from the infinite beyond and dreamed of touching the stars. Fate, however, had other plans for Korolev. Caught up in the maneuverings of powerful men, he would go on to suffer incredible hardships and privations at the hands of the empire he served, then ruled by a brutal dictator named Joseph Stalin. Korolev, along with thousands of other Soviet citizens, fell victim to a series of politically motivated purges that swept the empire. Tried as a saboteur and a traitor, he was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Despite multiple attempts to plead his case, Korolev was sent to one of the feared and infamous forced labor camps the regime operated, a gulag. Forced to mine gold in appalling conditions, often provided with little or no food for days, Korolev suffered horrendously. He would lose most of his teeth to a bout of severe scurvy, and after suffering a suspected heart attack, it must have seemed to Korolev like he would die there, alone and in the starless dark. But fate was not done with Korolev yet. After a retrial, Korolev's sentence was reduced to 8 years, and he was moved to a prison for Soviet scientists and engineers. There, he would quickly rise to a position of leadership, working on developing intercontinental ballistic missile technology, vehicles launched by gigantic, chemically fueled rocket boosters and designed to carry a nuclear warhead halfway around the world. While Korolev was working on these weapons of catastrophic destruction, despite, or perhaps because, of the horrendous treatment he'd endured, he saw the potential for the peaceful scientific exploration of space and the vast reaches of the solar system beyond. As his importance and influence grew, he would push for development of a rocket capable of delivering a satellite to Earth orbit. Initially meeting resistance, Korolev would play the two great powers of East and West against each other. Ultimately, he was successful in maneuvering the Soviet leadership into adopting his plan for the exploration of space, and in the process sparked a space race between the great empires of the day that would drive innovation for decades to come. Under Korolev's leadership of the Soviet space program, they would surge ahead, and on the 4th of October 1957, the world was rocked as the first orbital-capable vehicle delivered a tiny artificial satellite into Earth orbit. Just 4 years later, on April 12, 1961, the first human, a Soviet Air Force pilot named Yuri Gagarin, rode a chemical rocket designed by Korolev into the heavens. in that moment, the destiny of humanity was changed forever. Korolev was a dreamer and a visionary whose impact on space technology would echo around the world and throughout time. His designs and contributions to the space race and the era of exploration that it spawned cannot be overstated. But sadly, Korolev himself wouldn't live to see his work continued. Left weakened from his time in the labour camp, Korolev would die, shrouded in secrecy, in January of the year 1966. With his loss, the Soviet Empire's lead in space began to falter, and ultimately it would fall to others to take humanity further and faster into the future. The rockets that Korolev and others pioneered were indeed humanity's first successful attempts at spaceflight. Incredibly primitive and inefficient, they relied upon simple fuel oxidizer combustion reactions. Huge tanks were required to contain the vast quantities of fuel needed to complete the hard climb to orbit, but what they lacked in capability, they more than made up for in sound and fury. Rocket launches must have been, to the people of the time, like the very fires of Prometheus made manifest. Incredibly, despite the huge size and cost of these massive launch vehicles, everything but the tiny capsule in which passengers would ride was disposable. After the fuel was spent, the gigantic rocket booster would simply be jettisoned to crash back to Earth or burn up in the atmosphere. Despite this enormous drawback, the great nations of the day put these massive launchers to increasing use in the decades that followed. Just 3 years after Korolev's death, on the 20th of July 1969, the North American military test pilot Neil Armstrong would become the first person to walk on Earth's single rocky moon. Delivered there by the largest disposable rocket booster ever built, the Titanic American Saturn V, a vehicle the size of a hammerhead sat vertically on its engines. As the century wore on, rocketry would continue slowly to advance, with many nations of the time developing their own vehicles, all based on the same basic principle of disposable multi-stage rockets. Putting them to use, hurling unmanned probes throughout the Sol system, adding to a proliferation of satellites in Earth orbit, and building the first semi-permanent outposts in space. Tiny, delicate, and hopelessly primitive, yet undeniably magnificent. Perhaps the most iconic launcher of this age was the improbable-looking rocket plane, which launched sitting on its tail, strapped to an enormous disposable fuel tank, which in turn was strapped to another pair of solid rockets. Despite its absurd appearance on the pad, it was, at least partially, reusable, and, for its time, considered a major advancement. Earth, during this time, was undergoing a technological awakening, as one revolution after another reshaped the world again and again. It was a period in which humanity would transform itself, fed by the cheap, abundant energy of fossilized carbon fuels, and enlightened by an explosion of scientific and technological understanding. The population of Earth increased 5-fold, and rapidly increasing environmental and social pressures became an ever greater threat. The advent of digital computing, as the 21st century dawned, would pour fuel on the fires of innovation. Rockets became ever smarter and better designed, finally achieving true reusability as computer-controlled guidance systems managed powered vertical landings and improved engine designs squeezed ever higher performance out of the available fuels. It's worth noting, however, that the historical record of this time becomes increasingly difficult to read. In my Moby Reed's best-selling book, The Unknowable Age, I detail how the rise of computer technology, rampant experimentation with neural AI systems, and a proliferation of tools for the creation of alternative narratives led to an explosion of highly convincing, yet inaccurate or even entirely untrue historical records. They say history is written by the winner. If so, then the unknowable age was clearly one without winners, because everyone was writing their own history and with seemingly little regard for accuracy or indeed even a common truth. An example of the difficulty this presents for historians can be found in one of the most significant developments in human spaceflight, which took place from the mid to late 21st century. While much of what I'm about to discuss remains controversial or disputed, the key dates and facts are well supported. It begins with the founding and early operations of a space technology company, one that is still in existence today, Roberts Space Industries. RSI was founded in 2038 by entrepreneur and technologist Chris Roberts. Roberts appears to have been a passionate advocate for human expansion into the solar system. Numerous fragments exist depicting the company's early investment drive, made during the peak of a fashion occurring at the time for small-scale citizen investors to directly provide seed capital to start-up businesses. Roberts's pitch, or by some accounts promise, was that RSI would revolutionize access to space, lunar, and beyond within 10 years, though it seems likely this oft-quoted promise may have been something of an exaggeration. Nonetheless, coming as it did in a time of increasing overpopulation, ecological stress, and political unrest, this pitch seems to have resonated, with several records ascribing RSI with having attracted the largest number of citizen investors ever achieved. Soon after incorporating, however, in response to worsening global conditions, Roberts appears to have refocused the company's efforts on addressing terrestrial problems, leaving only a small advanced projects team to continue work on creating the revolutionary space-related designs and systems that had been promised, with only a handful of prototypes seeing completion and more concepts proven impossible than successfully demonstrated. Fortunately for Roberts and RSI, the larger terrestrial systems efforts were proving far more successful. The company would bring a hyper-efficient battery converter for electric cars to market in 2043, followed by everything from water purification systems to cricket farming technology. Precisely when RSI would make its first major contribution to space technology, however, remains hotly contested. Many believe they were an instrumental partner in developing the first space plane, which entered service mid-century, and there is evidence for activity in lunar exploration equipment, advanced rocket designs, and magnetic radiation shielding technology. But it would be in 2061 when Roberts encountered the work of Dr. Scott Childress, a scholar working on advanced theories for spacecraft propulsion systems, that he and his company would get the chance to radically alter the course of human history and live up to the almost impossibly high expectations that seemed to exist among the public of the time. Roberts recruited Childress, and together they set about building a team at RSI dedicated to to bringing Childress's design to fruition. It would take a further 14 years and all of the resources that RSI and Roberts could muster. But finally, on the 5th of March 2075, the new drive was ready. Based on the theories of Dr. Miguel Alcubierre, first proposed in the closing years of the previous century, the drive would make use of a form of spatial warping, contracting space ahead of the craft and expanding it behind. The key to achieving this came from the rare and highly unstable mineral quantanium. Childress's genius lay in formulating the basis by which this material, when properly refined, could be used to create the exotic negative energy density required to generate Alcubierre's warp bubble. The resulting quantum core engine was large, unwieldy, and demanded the power output of multiple chained fusion reactors. Yet, it nonetheless succeeded in generating a stable quantum warp bubble, propelling the RSI demonstrator ship to over 2,900 kilometers per second relative, or nearly 1% of the speed of light. It was, of course, the first quantum drive, and the effect it would have on the development of the Sol system cannot be overstated. Journeys that previously would have taken months or even years could now be completed in a matter of hours. At a stroke, Roberts and Childress had brought the entire system within reach, finally delivering in spectacular fashion on the bold promises made all those years before. I wonder if Roberts or Childress could have possibly known at the time just how far quantum drive technology would carry humanity in the decades and centuries ahead. In part 2 of the history of spaceflight, we'll follow the people of Earth as they ventured out to explore the wonders of their solar system, found new horizons to call home, and encountered new mysteries to haunt their dreams and